Welcome to our first annual Pathfinder Community Space Camp and Generative AI Showcase. It's so great to see so many of you here today. I see a few familiar faces, some new names. I'm very, very excited to have you here today. My name is Allison Abel. I'm the director of the Pathfinder community. I want to take just a brief moment to share with you what is Space Camp? What is the Pathfinder community? A common definition we have for Pathfinder is one that discovers a way, especially one that explores untraversed regions to mark out a new route. You, our automation, and you, our global community, are Pathfinders, and the community team is here to be one of your key partners in automation acceleration. Space Camp marks the next chapter in that community partnership. This is your mid-year community symposium intended to propel you to end-of-year success. Each day this week, we'll be offering daily activities, both live community-led conversations like this one, and in Pathfinder community experiences, anchored on our Automation Pathfinder program missions. The Automation Pathfinder program is your flight map for automation mission success, developed with over 20 years of hands-on automation expertise across thousands of use cases. Each mission that we'll be highlighting throughout the week is calibrated to serve as your blueprint for best practices to achieve scalable growth, measurable value, and long-term sustainability. We have a super exciting lineup, including our Bot Game Season 4 Generative AI edition, with our first challenge being announced today. Be sure you do not miss out on the opportunity to actually get hands-on with AI. I'll be sharing several key links in the chat. Now, without further ado, I do want to go ahead and dive into our Generative AI Ask Me Anything. As we get started, just a few quick reminders. Please always be respectful. This is a professional forum. We're going to do our best to answer as many questions as possible. Know, though, that we have a lineup of exciting engagements and events and resources in motion. Be sure to follow our social channels, check your inboxes, and follow our community for updates. We want this to be a two-way conversation and discussion. The one exciting thing about AI is the ideation it has sparked. Please use the chat to share your feedback, AI ideas, and ideal use cases, as well as collaborate with your peers. Leverage the Q&A feature, and I just want to highlight the Q&A feature is open starting now for your questions that you're interested in having Peter and Pratyush answer. So again, chat for thoughtful collaboration, and the Q&A for the questions that you have for Peter and Pratyush. You should see those in the bar above. Without further ado, let's go ahead and dive in. I don't want to waste any more time. I want to dive into your questions. Let's go ahead and get started. As I mentioned, we want this to be as interactive as possible. So as Peter and Pratyush introduce themselves, we're going to go ahead and launch a poll question that we'd love for everybody to take a few minutes to respond to. So as I launch this poll question, Peter, do you want to go ahead and get us started with your introduction?
Yeah, definitely. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us this Monday morning or Monday evening, depending on when you are, where you are. My name is Peter White. I lead our emerging products and AI at Automation Anywhere. Fairly new to the company. I've been here 6 months. Spent a long time at Salesforce before that, building our AI products there. So really excited to be here today and talk about all the exciting and fast-paced developments around generative AI. Hand it off to Pratyush to introduce himself as well.
Thanks, Peter. Hey, everyone. Thank you all for taking the time and joining us here. My name is Pratyush Garikapati. I've been with Automation Anywhere for about 18 months now, and I lead the company's generative AI initiatives. So overall, 18 years of experience in product management and consulting, really across intelligent automation and digital transformation. Fun fact, and probably what I think is really a cool moment, is my 8-year-old son coming up to me yesterday at breakfast table and explaining machine learning to me in his own words, which I think really is an example of what this technology can do and how it's become a mainstream conversation for us at this moment. So that's me. Allison, back to you to kick us off.
Yeah, so thank you for everyone that's participating in our poll. I really do appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and end our poll now and share with you the results. It's very interesting. It looks like we have a bit of a 50-50 split on those that have implemented some AI solutions and those in our business and some that have not. So let's go ahead and end this poll, and we're going to share the results here. So as you can see, have you implemented any AI solutions? Yes, 37%, no, 63%. If yes, what kind of AI solutions have you implemented? The leader is, it looks like chatbots. There's a few others. So other, please add in the chat, what is the other? What are the other solutions that you have implemented that we don't have on the list? We'd love to hear from you. If no, what is the top reason you have not implemented an AI solution? Knowledge and skill gap. Thank you so much for joining us today. That's one of the reasons that we're planning on hosting sessions like this over the next few weeks and quarters and months. So definitely be sure to join us. And then it looks like we have a pretty even spread across cost, ethical and legal concerns, and senior leadership buy-in. Oh, and a few others. So please, again, if you had selected others, we'd love to hear a little bit more. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and jump here into our conversational screen. The first question. So thank you to all of you who submitted so many questions ahead of time. We really, really do appreciate it as part of the registration process. The first question we wanted to dive into was the top question asked. So this was one of our top trending questions that was asked by multiple people. Pratyush, this one's for you to get us started. What are the implications of generative AI on automation? Does process automation still have a future? So I'd love to hear too from our audience on this. Again, what are the implications of generative AI on automation? Does process automation still have a future? Pratyush, what do you think?
Thanks, Alison, and thanks to the audience to submit that question. It's definitely a very pertinent conversation to have at this moment. To put things in perspective, let's think about how process automation really has evolved up until now, right? So building a process automation solution had a reasonably standard approach so far, which was if the inputs to a process was structured and rule-based, then you can use intelligent automation to read those inputs and perform a set of actions over your target systems like, say, a Salesforce or a mainframe. On the other hand, if it was not structured or not rule-based, then one would apply techniques like process reengineering or machine learning to make them as readable and rule-based as possible, and then use intelligent automation to update the target system. So that's been the largely, consensus-based approach that almost every organization out there has applied. Now, what's changed with generative AI is the ease with which machines can understand and create unstructured content. So let's say you give it an email and ask it to extract some key information or identify the sentiment. It can do that right out of the box without you ever having to build any code. You don't have to build any sort of machine learning model. You don't have to go through a massive change management effort to standardize the process. It can do that for you pretty much right out of the gate. But generative AI itself cannot access your target systems. It cannot go in and update your target systems. So you do still need an action layer of sorts to go do that for you, right? You can extract the content, you can understand what's being asked, but you still need an action layer to go update your target systems. And that's where a platform like Automation Anywhere works pretty well, is still quite relevant. And on top of that, and this is, in my opinion, the bigger requirement or something that everybody must consider is the need for governance, auditability, security, compliance. None of that goes away. In fact, they even may become more stringent as we go forward. So the way we really see it is a combination of generative AI with a platform like Automation Anywhere is what will truly create an impact. Now, this is just one way of how these two can really coexist and in fact drive more value. There could obviously be other examples, but I would say this is the broad way of how one can interpret this. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting to hear. Peter, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Pratyush summarized it well. The power of these two things combined together, I think, is where the real magic happens. So if you look at a lot of the use cases that you'll be able to do now with these generative AI models, there's still a lot of additional steps to build the entire workflow. And that's where the automation pieces come in. And I think having that validation layer, having an evaluation of the output, all of those things you can do in automation on top of this sort of cognitive capability of a generative AI model are what really sort of businesses need in terms of making this real in their organization. So definitely don't, back to the original question, definitely don't see intelligent automation going anywhere. I think this is an accelerant for it. I think what you're going to see, and you're already starting to see, is businesses look to their automation teams to figure out how to get generative AI into their business and help them, accelerate the programs they've already started.
And I think that leads into our next set of questions. And Logan Price, thank you so much for sharing your question in the Q&A. I just want to again encourage anyone in the audience to add questions to the Q&A. Logan asked, are there plans to implement a text-to-code feature in the A360 bot editor? And what I'd love to use this question for to launch is Destry actually submitted a question as part of the registration asking, interested in hearing more information on the Automation Anywhere generative AI strategy and roadmap. So Pratyush, can you go ahead and kick us off and give us a bit of an overview of our strategy and roadmap direction?
Yeah, sure. And I do want to caveat by saying there's only so much that I can give away at this point. These are still very active conversations, and hopefully we will make some announcements pretty near in the future. But having said that, at a very high level, we see this playing out in two ways. First is, how do we leverage generative AI to be able to automate more than what was possible before? So one of the examples I gave earlier was, how do you look at the inputs that are coming to a process, make them standardized, and based on whatever gets applicable from an intelligent automation context, automate that. And in many ways, and in many examples that we've seen, that usually translates to about 60% of the existing business process getting automated, or maybe 80%. There are cases, I would say really exceptions in most places, that 100% of a business process really got automated. And that really speaks to the nature of how dynamic enterprises today really operate in. So our goal is to figure out how do we leverage generative AI, put that in the hands of our customers, and allow them to automate more than what was possible before. So to that effect, what we've already done is we have OpenAI and Azure GPT packages in a bot store, and these are already out there that you can leverage. So our customers can use these in their existing automations, and we will very soon also publish a Google Vertex package that our customers can make use of that too. So going forward, and the second way that we really see this playing out is, how do we use generative AI to improve our existing products and also add new capabilities that will enable our customers to really build automations faster and better, right? So we have a few things, as I mentioned earlier, that are brewing up over here. We will announce those. And to that note, I do have a demo that I hope we'll get to shortly to explain how you can actually use the generative AI package that I mentioned earlier in automations today. So through a combination of our automation copilot capability along with generative AI capabilities, how does it really translate into on-the-ground automation efficiency? So when we do the demo, that we'll see that shortly. Peter, anything you want to add over there?
I think you covered the two categories. The thing is, you can get started today, and you'll see that in the demo with these integrations. There's more coming on that. We also, if you were watching a couple weeks ago when Google announced some of their generative AI solutions, we're one of their early partners around that. So we'll be releasing soon, along with them, more capabilities integrated to Google's generative AI models as well. We're also working with others like Amazon. So our approach on the integrations is to really be an open system. I think we can use the best of what's out there when it comes to generative AI. And you'll see a lot of options in terms of how you can integrate these models. And then for the future, I think that the question is a good one. You're going to see something like that soon. We're not announcing it just yet, but being able to use generative AI to create code or even to generate automation directly is really a superpower. And we think it's very possible. It's something we're working on. So you're going to see more announcements about that coming in the near future.
A quick follow-up question. We had a bit of more of a specific product related question. And this comes from Michael through our registration process. Does Automation Anywhere envision the incorporation of a co-pilot type assistance for the production of the automation success platform A360 code? Peter, I think you were kind of touching on this just a minute ago, but I do want to touch on the co-pilot piece of it.
Yep, we 100% envision that, Michael. It's a good question. Stay tuned for that. We're going to be announcing more about that very soon. That I think is going to be a big change in how everyone creates automation and hopefully accelerate a lot of folks' automation programs.
All right, Pratyush, thank you so much for deploying our poll. So we are asking, what areas of your business do you think could benefit from AI solutions? I'm going to go ahead and end this poll and share their responses. It's a pretty even spread across the board. I think this really demonstrates the power of AI and the versatility of it across all areas of business. So going ahead and end this poll and share the results. So the leader of the pack was customer service and support, followed by, it looks like, finance and accounting, with a close third of supply chain and logistics. Peter or Pratyush, any comments on what's shared here?
I think it's as in line with what we've heard in other discussions around generative AI. I know we had an event last week and I saw customer service and support at the top of that list as well. It's a great lead in to Pratyush's demo, because I think you'll see an example of customer service and support, how generative AI can be used there.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. You're just setting the stage up for us really well today. Again, just really want to quickly emphasize we have the Q&A open. Thank you, Mike, for sharing your question. And I did see, Andrew, your question as well in the chat, so we'll be sure to get to those. Pratyush, do you want to go ahead and let's take a quick demo break?
Absolutely. So, Alison, if you can confirm, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay. You can see Salesforce and Automation Anywhere open up here, right?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right. It's no surprise that our first demo is, and given the interest of time, the only demo that we'll be doing in this webinar is around customer service. So just to set the premise, right, the use case that we're talking about here is in the context of a contact center, where you have agents dealing with very angry customers complaining about their flight delays, the kind of issues that they've been having through their onboarding experience. So in a typical enterprise context, you have those complaints flowing into your CRM system. CRM system here is Salesforce. That's what you'll be using as an example, but this conceptually could be any CRM system. And what we've really done over here is, for the folks who are familiar with Automation Copilot, is we have made a Copilot, basically Automation Anywhere Copilot, available within Salesforce. So an agent can really look at what the customer is asking about, which is this whole blob of complaint that's written over here, and what they can really do with it through Automation Copilot. So here we have, customer Cameron Steele, passenger on whatever date, they had issues with their flight, and that's essentially what they're complaining about. Now, as an agent like me, who's dealing with multiple complaints day in and day out, agents usually get measured by how quickly are they really able to turn around the query or turn around a response back to the customer. And there's obviously a nature of how well are they able to articulate a response back to the customer? Are they really able to resolve the query? Is it more a reference? So how long does it really take? What's the cycle time around resolution of a query? And what's the first time response rate is usually how contact center agents get measured on. So what we have done as part of this whole use case is made Automation Copilot available directly in the target application like Salesforce or any CRM application for that matter, and given the ability for the agent to unearth the necessary information. Here, the agent needs to understand what was the flight the customer was on, which was the frequent flyer number, so that they can determine what the right amount or level of perks really are. Is the customer really asking about delays, or are they asking about baggage lost? So all these are different information that they need to unearth. Now you can imagine doing this day in and day out, even across the 8-hour period. It just takes a lot of toll. It takes a lot of time to do that. And not to mention, most enterprises have multiple applications where this information is spread across, and that's where process automation plays a strong role, which is going across those different apps, getting the right amount of data, getting the right information, and then being able to combine that and produce the insight needed. So what you have here is Zoe, who's our contact center agent persona, uh, being able to interact with automation to do all of this. So what she's doing at this point is running a query against the customer's complaint and trying to determine what exactly the frequent flyer number is, what's the flight number, where did they depart from, where were they supposed to land, when was the flight really supposed to take off, and then respond accordingly to the customer. What sits behind this is obviously an automation anywhere automation that we have built. To show you a view of what that looks like, this is how a process in automation anywhere is constructed. It's basically a low-code interface. For the folks who are not familiar, you can build any sort of workflow similar to the whole workflow of how the resolution of a query really needs to be executed. The interesting thing here, and if I take you back to Salesforce, is let's say your goal is to extract frequent flyer number from this whole blob of text. Now, as a developer, you can imagine the number of regular expressions and the kind of rules that you'll have to write to extract the frequent flyer number from this whole text. Similarly, understanding which was the departing airport and the arrival airport, what date was the flight supposed to take off. All these are information that's built and that's embedded into this whole unstructured text. And this goes back to the first example I gave, which is how does process automation really play a big role over here? Now, traditionally, there could have been various ways in which you can automate this. You would have been able to extract this info. But what happens now with generative AI is how easily can you really get this information out? So one of the steps you would see in this entire flow is, and if I were to zoom in a little bit, is extract the information with ChatGPT. Now, this is a package, as I mentioned earlier, that's already available within our bot store. You can go make use of it immediately. And the way this really works is, so what I'm asking, as part of my execution flow, I'm invoking ChatGPT. And this is really OpenAI GPT at this point. And what I'm really asking you to do is return the numerical frequent flyer number from the following text. And I pass that entire email to GPT. I'm not writing any code. I'm not writing any regular expression. I'm not doing any sort of text manipulation. All I'm saying is, here's a blob of text. Give me the frequent flyer number. And it does that. I don't have to build any code over there. Similarly, I'm also asking you to categorize this entire complaint into whether this was dealing with flight delay or baggage claim. And it does that too. Again, I don't have to write any code. So what you really saw was two really interesting examples, which typically would have taken bulk of the development time, which is how do you extract the relevant information? And then how do you classify the nature of the query? These two by itself create a whole slew of use cases. You can think about email routing as a generic use case, which is based on what the end user or what the person on the other side is asking for. How do you route the email to the appropriate department? Or based on the information embedded in an unstructured content, how do you get the relevant information to determine how you really want your workflow to execute? So that's two very powerful use cases embedded in just 2 lines of code or 2 lines of automation, and makes the whole thing quite easy for you. So this example goes all the way across. There are various other places that we have GPT embedded in this flow. So one of the things we also do is respond back to the customer. So how do you use GPT? And for the folks who have been experimenting with GPT, one thing you would understand is that you can not only understand unstructured content, but you can generate new content. So as part of Zoe's job is to be able to respond back to the customer saying, hey, we are really sorry for whatever happened, but here's what we can do for you. And here what we are using GPT for is generating that pre-built response but more importantly, it's contextual in nature, right? So based on the kind of complaint that Cameron here, our passenger, has come up with, based on that context, GPT generates a pre-built response for us, which Zoe can then edit before she actually sends it off to the customer. So a couple of examples of how you can really use or embed GPT in your existing automation flows, really improving how much you can do, basically really expanding the possibilities of automation, expanding the scope with which you could have automated earlier. So that's one example. Obviously, there are plenty more that we will be coming out with shortly. Peter, anything you want to add over here?
I think the use cases you showed, especially the extraction of data from an email or unstructured text, that's a use case that I think has been around for some time with AI models like entity extraction models. The big difference now is that you don't need to train a custom model to do these sorts of tasks. Just through the prompt, you can instruct it essentially to get data. And this is a really, really, really simple example of a prompt, but you can sort of engineer that prompt, if you will, to be more robust and specific around what you want to get out of something like an email. And you can get multiple things out of an email at once. And then even provide some level of validation and requirements to ensure that it got the right data, or if there's an exception, that it passes an exception back. So all of that can sort of be done through prompting and natural language with these new models. And I think the fact that you don't need a data scientist, you don't necessarily need an MLOps team to deploy a bunch of custom models for each task, and you can use these off-the-shelf models, is really going to change the adoption of these use cases pretty quickly, because now it's going to be much faster, much easier, and frankly, probably much more powerful and accurate to get these sorts of things into production.
I see a quick question from Logan, and Matthew and Andrew and Muhammad. I see your questions as well. We'll definitely get to those. Logan's question is relevant to the demo though, so I want to be sure we address it. Is the ChatGPT action shown developed by Automation Anywhere? Do we need an authentic auth token to use?
That's a good question. The action that we're showing right now is developed by Automation Anywhere. Like I said, this is a package that's available in our bot store. You can download them and use them pretty much now. Having said that, at the moment, these packages would require you to come up with your own subscription. So if you're using OpenAI GPT as an example, you'll need to subscribe with OpenAI. If you're using Azure GPT, you'll need to come with Azure subscription. So both of those actions or both of those capabilities are available. Going forward in the future, there are alternatives that we are currently exploring. Again, I'm being very tight-lipped over here deliberately, but there are alternatives that we are exploring to make sure that this whole experience of bringing a generative AI model into your automation workflow is as seamless as possible. So stay tuned for that. But for now, the idea is that you bring your own subscription.
Right. So Pratyush, as you exit your screen and we head back into chat, I do want to address a few of the questions that have popped up kind of related to our roadmap and strategy. So Matthew's shared a question: how do you see LLMs improving both the setup process, labeling, and context understanding for process mining solution Fortress IQ, or now lovingly known as process discovery? Peter, do you want to jump in on that question?
Yeah, so we are definitely looking at a few things within our process discovery product of how we can use some of these new models to help sort of accelerate the whole process of going from, observing to essentially automating what you find. So there's kind of two areas I think of most interest. The first is around just being able to sort of, I would call it chat with your data. So there's a lot of data in process discovery, and some of the new capabilities in these models around generating code or SQL queries or other things to help you kind of interrogate that data, allow you to maybe more quickly visualize and get insights around those data sets that you've collected, which are pretty powerful in terms of, this is highly detailed data across many users around what exactly they're doing with a process. And so it can be very useful for an organization. Second part is once you've discovered a process, how do you turn that into an automation? And going back to the earlier question around the co-pilot to help you with the production of automation code, we're looking at this for process discovery as well. We have all this rich data of here's the process. How does that then translate into an automation, and how do we do that more automatically for you so you don't have to build it from scratch? And so stay tuned for more on that. We're actively working on these things, and there'll be more announcements soon on some of the specifics of what's coming out and when.
Perfect. So Andrew had a question here that was then followed up, and I apologize if I am mispronouncing this name, Chakrander, that are very similar that I want to be sure we address related to our strategy as well. How does Automation Anywhere plan to stay competitive with well-funded generative AI startups such as Adept AI? And then the second question that's similar is, why should someone use Automation Anywhere to integrate with generative AI versus traditional integrations? Pratyush, do you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, that's again another interesting question. In terms of, so if you take an example like an Adept, or there are a few other examples like Adept, but in general, the idea really is what kind of integration models do you want to expose on top of your existing business or IT landscape? Technologies like Adept and a few others out there, while they are promising in nature, they do use underlying generative AI models in there. They still are relatively untested in an enterprise context. What really matters at the end of the day, and this goes back to my earlier comment around the relevancy of process automation, right? You still have to understand, or you still have to bake in the needs of governance into your existing automations. How easily can you make, or how easily can you unearth the auditability of the underlying process execution? How do you understand whether the generative AI model that you have used, what's the path it took to give you a certain output that you have eventually used in your process automation? So auditability, governance, security around the platform, resiliency of the platform, all of those in an enterprise context matter quite a bit, especially if you're working in a regulatory regime or you need to adhere to certain compliance standards. So the promise of automation is not new. That's been around for many, many years now. But what really matters is how easily and how with what degree of resiliency can you apply that in an enterprise context. Where Automation Anywhere really has a strong strength is the governance play, right? That's something that we have time and again in various enterprises, in a strong compliance and regulatory regimes. We have deployed our product, deployed our platform. We've seen that scale quite effectively well. There are various compliance standards that we as a platform adhere to, all with the intent of providing the trust to our customers, saying that this is a platform that you can bank on from a scale perspective, from a governance standpoint. And that's really the assurance that that an enterprise would really need. In terms of generative AI or large language models in general, and like I said earlier, we really see this as a coexistence play, right? You need AI in general, and more specifically generative AI, to be able to understand what the content is all about. Obviously, generative AI plays a strong role, or is quite good at understanding language, and that's a medium of communication for most people. And therefore, it's able to understand what I as an end user am really asking for, or what I as an end user want to do on my target system. So it acts as that initial layer to convert those natural languages to systemic instructions, which then can be read through a platform like Automation Anywhere. So, I mean, I guess bottom line really is that you see this as a coexistence play rather than this versus that. In terms of how we would, how Automation Anywhere would evolve in the context of the new technologies or the new companies that are coming up with generative AI, it's really a question of what kind of an enterprise pedigree does a platform really have, right? What kind of success stories has it had in deploying enterprise-grade solutions and automations in an existing IT landscape? So that's my 2 cents on that. Peter, anything you want to add there?
I think where the models, if you look at even the most powerful generative AI models today, they are not immune to making a lot of errors. There is, without a doubt, if you try to do some sort of open-ended task, you're going to have issues. You're going to have errors, hallucinations, as people call them, where they're think they're correct, but they're actually wrong. To Pratyush's point, I think governance is important, but I also think using these in the business context in more narrow domains as a tool in some ways to accomplish tasks that a person would have to do sometimes in the context of an automation is where these are going to really make an impact in the next couple years even. So I think having a platform, it's not that these models are going to be able to just run independently and do everything you need to do in the near future. You need that automation piece. You need the workflow and the structure that you give it in an automation. And then you need to deploy these models strategically at targeted tasks along that workflow where it makes sense. And I think that's why, you look at generative AI as really a combination of this plus automation is what enables the business transformation. It's really not one or the other.
All right. I want to be mindful of time. These are some great questions. Please continue to ask questions in the chat or the Q&A. I want to dive into our next big topic, but before we do that, I do have a poll question here that I do want to deploy. So let me go ahead and grab it here. Oh, where'd it go? All right. Oh, I see what I did. Apologies. A little technical difficulty there. I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll question. What is the current or would be most important metric for measuring the success of AI solutions for your organization? As you answer that question, I want to begin to transition into a hot topic that we saw a lot of questions around through our registration process, and we're seeing pop up here. I'm going to go ahead and lean into the question that Muhammad asked here to kind of summarize, and we can dive into Priya's question as well. But Muhammad asked, could you please also talk about information privacy and security around GPT and integration in light of some of the concerns raised recently in the media? A question that was also asked in our preceded registration process as well, very similar. We're seeing some countries also start to take some legal action around this topic as well. So Peter, do you have any initial thoughts on privacy concerns, legality, especially in light of recent media reports?
Yeah, definitely can share some around that. I think, there's a few options out there now with these larger generative AI models, and I would say choose wisely in terms of which ones you use and use them appropriately. And so there are, if you look at what Microsoft Azure, their OpenAI service, the terms of that, for example, there's no data used from that for model training. It's controlled within your cloud environment. There is some logging of data that goes into the model, the prompts for abuse monitoring, but even that is a option you can ask to have turned off, so there could be no logging of the data. There's also similar, with Google's models, which are not broadly released yet. I imagine there's going to be similar sort of assurances around your data, that no data leaves your environment, that data is not used for retraining general models. It's only for your environment and your models. And I think you'll see the same things from Amazon as well. And I think that the choice of the model and reviewing the terms of that, there are already ones out there that have these assurances, is the key thing to make sure that your data is not being misused or leaked out of your organization. So I would say that's a key thing. And some of the news reports you've seen, if you were going on to the UI of ChatGPT and you were copying data in there, that was a consumer product. That's you can review for yourself what the terms were, but that's where you start to get data that maybe isn't up to an enterprise data security, that is not up to an enterprise security level. And so that's, I think, where you've seen some of those problems. But I imagine, especially with the pace of this and the amount of investment that's going into generative AI for businesses, you're going to see a lot of options out there in the near future where you do have the same level of data security and privacy that you would expect from any other enterprise software service.
I want to share Priya's question because I think it's an industry oftentimes that has to handle, data privacy issues. How can we see the model implemented for healthcare use cases where there's a lot of PHI, PII information involved? I think, as we know, healthcare, like I just mentioned, it's all about patient privacy, especially within the US, and I know broadly globally too.
Yeah, I think some of the models already have the HIPAA certification for healthcare information. If not, I know some of the ones that are released soon probably will. So there's going to be options that are compliant for health use cases. And again, the fact that no data is stored, no data is captured outside of any use of what you're doing with it is part of the kind of key requirements around that. And then I think there's going to be a lot more options. You've already seen that there's a lot of model variants being built, including smaller models that can run on-prem or in contained environments as well for those customers who want to do that. So I think you'll see number of options for healthcare use cases even in the not too distant future. But I think in the near term, you definitely want to be very careful. That's an area that is highly regulated and very sensitive. So I think when you start using these models, being careful with what data goes in there and avoiding that is key. But I imagine in the not too distant future, there's going to be lots of options that meet the bar for that industry as well.
All right.
So it's good to get started now. I'd say, not with real patient data necessarily, but start building your use cases now, because I think you're going to have some options in terms of the technology infrastructure very, very soon. Go ahead, Pratyush, sorry.
No, that's fine. And just to add to that, right, even if you look at healthcare, which is obviously very heavily regulated in nature, even within that, there are pockets of use cases that don't necessarily require you to deal with a lot of data privacy. So revenue cycle management is one example that we've seen often come up in various conversations where you can still automate or still look at the potential of automating that whole end-to-end business process without actually divulging or without being forced to divulge a lot of privacy related information. So the encouragement, I guess, here is really look at really peel the onion over there rather than treating an entire vertical as this is heavily regulated, heavily compliant. Rather than that, do peel the onion to see what inside that really requires a higher degree of compliance vis-a-vis where you can still use the existing capabilities and open up the possibilities there.
And that's actually a great segue. I did end our poll. I'm going to go ahead and share the results. What is the current or would be most important metric for measuring the success of AI solutions for your organization? Pratyush, as you just mentioned, improve efficiency or productivity, very much led the pack, followed by return on investment. And then we saw a pretty even spread across the board there. I do want to touch on Mike's question. And Mike, thank you so much for being patient. So Mike Gill asked, how do we take customer data, file stores, databases, ERP systems, as we were just mentioning, and utilize it in a generative AI response? What I mean by that is ChatGPT is on public data, as we just discussed. Do we need to build a custom model for a customer on Azure and leverage that? Or will there be a way to have AI mine customer data and produce responses? I can see knowledge-based use cases being very powerful inside ARI or Copilot. So this kind of starts us into the direction of how do we get this thing started? What do we need to know? Pratyush, you want to go ahead and jump in? Or sorry, Peter, go for it.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. So I think if I understand the question, being able to use your company specific data in the context of something like a ChatGPT or other generative AI model is definitely sort of an exciting use case and makes it a lot more relevant to your business. I think there's a few different approaches to do that. And I would say that it's still nascent, since everyone is sort of figuring out how best to work with these models. But I think one of the key things is that a lot of the approaches to do that don't necessarily require training a new model on your data set. It's not that you have to take the model and retrain it necessarily on your data. There are approaches around the prompts that you give to the model where you can actually take your specific data and pass that in as part of a prompt to the model, so it has context, and then performs a task based on that context or extracts information based on that context. And then there's other more sort of sophisticated ways to do like what's called vector stores. So you're basically creating embeddings for all of your information and then retrieving that, and then only using the generative AI model for sort of a final step, and then as part of the prompt, extracting information from that. So I think the short answer is, there's several options, both today and probably coming in the future, around doing that. And I think you could start to build out some use cases today without having to go down the route of saying, I need to take all this data and somehow get it into the model, because that may not be the best approach for the particular things you want to do. I don't know, Pratyush, if you want to add to that.
No, I guess the important thing, and one of the things both of us have been restating in different ways, is don't look at generative AI as an answer for everything. There is a time and place for it. Look at the use case to understand whether that really is the right solution for you, and based on that, apply in the right manner. This is still, I think everybody in the world right now is just only trying to understand what generative AI can do for them. So there is a lot of newness to this technology, and that's really the encouragement here, which is to understand what it does before you apply that in the enterprise context, especially when you are dealing with sensitive data, your internal data, and exposing that on a technology like this. It also goes back to the comment that Peter, you made earlier around choose your model wisely. Not every model treats the data with the same tender love and care in terms of data privacy, confidentiality, whether they use the data for retraining the model. So it's important that you choose the model based on what your end goal is and what kind of standards that you as a company would want to adhere to. So keep all of that in mind before you go head first into this. The technology does hold a lot of promise, and that's the reason we also are investing quite heavily into it. But it does require a fair degree of understanding to ensure that you, from a use case standpoint, you're able to apply it correctly. That's a word of caution, at the same time, encouragement around it.
Yeah, and Peter, I'm going to follow up with that because Pratyush just answered the next question I was going to ask, which is, if you're just starting out with generative AI, what pitfalls should you avoid? Would there be another pitfall that you would highlight in addition to the one Pratyush just mentioned to kind of keep in mind?
I think, yeah, one I would add is, once you've identified a use case, starting to roll that out to production, you need to think about how you're going to monitor this over time. And so I think you don't want to run blindly with these models. This is where it's different than, rules-based or declarative sort of automation workflows. These are statistical models, and they have, unpredictable behavior in some cases, which is okay, which is part of what makes them powerful, but you need to monitor those in production. So using your automation workflow to make sure you're capturing the data and the performance around these models is a key part of making them successful, because likely once you deploy them, you're then going to be looking at, how well is it doing? What changes do I need to make? How do I adjust this going forward? So that is a key part of using any of these generative AI solutions in production. And something you have to think about when you're designing your solution is how do you make sure you have visibility to what these models are going to be doing.
All right, I know we're getting towards the end of our time. I just want to share a last reminder. Please add any questions that you have into the chat or Q&A. I'd love to get to those in the time we have remaining. I also have our last poll question here, and I'd love for Pratyush to just quickly touch on it. As I mentioned, our community team is eager to partner with you in your automation success. An extension of the community team is definitely the product team. So Pratyush, do you want to talk a little bit about how we'd love to, be partnering with our customers to see them be successful in generative AI?
Yeah, and I'll also address one of the questions that we saw in the chat as well, around how we want to partner with our customers. So going back to the earlier comment, we do plan to make a couple of announcements very near in future, and as part of that, we will allow, or rather, we'll make sure that our customers have an ability to sign up to expand these conversations further, and then have a deeper dive around the kind of use cases they see and how we, from an Automation Anywhere perspective, can really help them build those use cases around these generative AI models. So that's something that's coming up in future. There was a question around wait list, if I saw that correctly. That's pretty much the way we are going to approach it, right? Once we are ready to do beta testing, we will invite our customers to sign up for that, and then they can get early access to it. At the same time, we really are looking for feedback over here, right? So we would love to hear feedback around how Automation Anywhere is making this whole ecosystem enabled for our customers. At the same time, we would love to hear what kind of use cases, what kind of automation scenarios are you looking at in your existing organizations, and what are the challenges that you're facing. It's those challenges, it's that feedback that really helps us understand how we can design our products to help you alleviate those in a much better manner. So that's something we absolutely would look to collaborate with you on. Stay tuned for that.
All right, perfect. We do have a minute or two left, so I want to play a quick little game. One thing we did promise throughout this session was to talk about use cases. So I have a few different industries listed here. Pratyush, Peter, I'm going to give you a few seconds to think of a good use case that would match this industry. So Pratyush, you're up first. I hate to put you on the spot, but you're going to go first. And the one that comes to mind is finance. I know we didn't touch much on finance today, but I know that's a hot area in industry. What's a use case that comes to mind for you?
Well, finance usually has no dearth of use cases. It's one of those areas where you can explore quite a bit. But one use case that does come to mind, and this goes back to my Six Sigma days, is and something that finance operations in general deal with, is how do you really look at supply contracts, unearth the terms and conditions in there, and then be able to match that up against the invoices that your supplier generates for you, right? So this is practically a use case for any procurement organization within the finance group for any of the enterprises. And in many cases, and a lot of the effort that really goes into finance ops is reconciliation. So they need to understand, when my supplier raised an invoice, is this invoice amount really in line with the contract that I signed up with the supplier? And this gets even more complex when you have multiple departments raising their own procurement requests, and then that aggregates to maybe 1,000 requests over a month, and now your procurement team has 1,000 invoices to deal with. So notwithstanding what we did during the Six Sigma days, but really being able to understand what the contract is saying, and legal contracts can get very complex very quickly. So understanding what the terms and conditions of those contracts are and applying that in the context of the invoice is, I think, where the low-hanging fruit really is from this context.
All right, Peter, you're not off the hook. I know we're hitting the wire here, but I'm going to give you banking. Similar to finance, banking was another industry we didn't get a chance to really touch on today. What is a use case that comes to mind for you?
Well, there's a number of good ones I could think of, kind of like Pratyush's example around the customer service processing, but I'll take one that's a little more specific, maybe to banking and some investment banking use cases. So a possible use case would be, helping to generate things like pitch decks that you do for banking, and using a combination of capturing information either from the web or from specific materials or reports and then using generative AI to help summarize and extract information from those to construct what would be the outline of your pitch deck. So, create a summary of this company, financials from last quarter, extract what was their profit over the last 5 years. And so those sorts of things that are sort of like, you have to look up the information, you have to parse it out, put it in a document. Generative AI could help you get started with that. You obviously need to validate it, proofread it, adjust it appropriately, but it could really speed up that process for a banking organization.
All right, we've hit that time. I really appreciate Pratyush and Peter. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. As I mentioned, this is only the start of more to come. Pratyush and Peter definitely have teased some exciting announcements we have in play and are looking forward to sharing with you very soon, as well as some more event and resources too. I added to the chat a few links related to our first annual Space Camp and Generative AI Showcase. Be sure to check those out, especially bot games. And lastly, I do want to make sure everyone is aware our annual conference is coming up. Imagine 2023 registration is open and we have early bird pricing right now, 50% off. This is a cannot miss event. Pratyush and Peter will be there. This is your opportunity to connect with product leaders, your peers, and learn all the amazing things that Automation Anywhere can unleash and lead you towards automation success. Thank you everyone for taking the time again for being here. We really do appreciate it. And we look forward to continuing the conversation with you all very soon. Thank you so much. And I hope you all have a wonderful day today.